"Who would ever want to marry you?" my father said. The ring caught the afternoon light. Dad had spotted it seconds earlier, locked onto my left hand like he'd found evidence. Now the whole backyard was watching him perform. I should have left right then. But I stood there in my uniform slacks with a paper plate in one hand, trying to keep my expression neutral, while my father turned my engagement into a punchline. And I had no idea that the answer to his question was less than 30 seconds away. I wish I could say it began there, but it started weeks earlier. I'd driven to my parents' place that afternoon, telling myself it would be fine. Just a cookout, just family, nothing I hadn't survived before. I could do a few hours, eat some food, make small talk, leave before things got uncomfortable. I pulled up and saw the setup immediately. Folding chairs lined up in uneven rows across the grass, the smell of charcoal and lighter fluid drifting from the grill Dad had set up near the fence, a cooler packed with ice sitting under the oak tree where it always sat. The Bluetooth speaker was already playing, some classic rock station turned just loud enough to fill the silence between conversations. It looked like every other family gathering we'd ever had. The same chairs, the same cooler, the same playlist. That's what made it dangerous. It all looked so normal. I grabbed the potato salad I'd brought from the passenger seat and made my way through the side gate. The smell hit me first. Burgers on the grill, that mix of meat and smoke and the faint chemical edge of lighter fluid Dad always used too much of. Warm potato salad from someone's kitchen. Sunscreen, bug spray, the smell of summer gatherings. Mom spotted me before I'd even reached the back steps. She was standing near the folding table someone had set up with paper plates and plastic cups, talking to my aunt. The second she saw me, her whole posture shifted. She came over with her arms open, the kind of hug that looks warm from a distance but feels stiff up close. She pulled me in, held me for exactly 3 seconds, then held me at arm's length and gave me a once-over. "You look thin," she said. "Not hello, not how are you, just that." "I'm fine. You sure? You're not overdoing it with all that running you do?" I told her I was eating fine and let it go. She patted my shoulder, smoothed down a piece of my hair that didn't need smoothing, and then turned to greet someone else who'd just walked up. The whole exchange had that rehearsed quality, like she'd been waiting to deliver those exact lines since I'd confirmed I was coming. Dad was posted near the cooler, talking to my uncle about something that required a lot of hand gestures, probably politics, probably something he'd heard on talk radio that morning. He glanced over when I walked up, but didn't come over right away. That was normal. He liked to make you come to him. He liked to make you wait. People drifted over to say hello. An aunt I hadn't seen in months asked how I was doing. A cousin I barely knew asked if I was still doing the military thing, saying it like it was a hobby I might have outgrown. I told them I was an army medic and kept my answer short. I wasn't trying to be unfriendly. I just knew how these conversations worked. One wrong word and you'd spend the next 20 minutes defending a decision you'd made years ago, explaining why you joined, explaining why you stayed, explaining why your life choices were valid. I grabbed a paper plate and moved toward the food table. Someone had brought deviled eggs. Someone else had brought a pasta salad that looked like it had been sitting in the sun too long. I took a burger and some chips and found a spot near the edge of the yard where I could eat without being in the center of everything. I wasn't planning to announce anything. The ring was just on my hand. I'd been wearing it for 2 weeks. It was a simple band, nothing flashy, but it caught the light when I reached for a napkin. That's when my cousin Jenna noticed. She was sitting in one of the folding chairs a few feet away. She glanced down at my hand, then back up at my face. She gave me this look, half smile, half warning. Then her eyes flicked toward Dad. He was mid-conversation, but something made him turn. Maybe he heard the shift in the noise. Maybe he just sensed that attention had moved. Either way, his eyes went straight to my left hand. "What's that?" he said, loud enough that the conversation near us stopped. I kept my voice level. It's a ring. A ring, he repeated, like I'd said something absurd. He was grinning now, the kind of grin that meant he'd found an angle. He took a step closer. You got engaged? Yes. He let out this big theatrical laugh, the kind designed to pull other people in. It worked. A few relatives glanced over. Someone near the grill put down their tongs and turned to watch. My uncle stopped mid-sentence. You're telling me somebody proposed to you? He said it like he was narrating a punchline. Like the setup was so good he couldn't help himself. Who would ever want to marry you? The backyard went quiet for a second. I could hear the speaker still playing in the background, some song I didn't recognize. I could hear the hiss of something cooking on the grill. And then the laughter started. Not everyone, but enough. Nervous laughter. The kind people use when they're not sure if they're allowed to join in but don't want to be left out. Someone near the cooler gave this short bark of a laugh. Someone else muttered something under their breath that I couldn't quite catch. Plates clinked. The whole yard became an audience. Mom was standing a few feet away, holding a cup of lemonade. She looked at me, then at Dad, then down at her hands. Her expression said, "Don't make this a scene," but she wasn't saying it to him. She wasn't saying anything to him. She just stood there. Dad kept going. He was warming up now, feeding off the attention. You could see it in his posture, the way he stood a little taller, the way his voice carried across the yard. Sarah's got a strong personality, he said to the group, using the family euphemism that meant too much. Too opinionated, too stubborn, too hard to deal with. Takes a special kind of guy to sign up for that. He paused, letting it land, making sure everyone heard, assuming this fiancé of yours actually exists. A few more people laughed. Someone said something about imaginary friends. Someone else made a joke I couldn't quite hear but could tell from the tone was meant to pile on. My face was burning. I could feel it. The heat spreading from my cheeks down my neck. I wanted to leave. I wanted to throw my plate down and walk out. But that would prove him right. That would be the dramatic exit he was setting me up for. It was the kind of jab that left you two options: react and prove you're too sensitive, or stay quiet and let everyone assume he's right. Either way, he wins. He'd done this before, not about an engagement, but about other things, other choices I'd made that he didn't approve of. The pattern was familiar. The tactic was old. I didn't clap back. I wanted to. I had about 6 responses lined up in my head, each one sharper than the last. I could have asked him why he felt the need to humiliate his own daughter in front of the family. I could have pointed out that he'd never once asked me about my life in any meaningful way. I could have reminded him that I'd been self-sufficient for years without his input. But I steadied my breathing the way I would on a call, the way I'd learned to do when the scene was chaotic and I needed to stay functional. I asked God silently for self-control, not for the perfect comeback, not for the thing that would shut him down and make everyone gasp, just enough to hold steady. Proverbs 15,001 came to mind. A gentle answer turns away wrath. I wasn't sure I could manage gentle, but I could manage quiet. Then I heard a car door close. The sound cut through the hum of conversation. Gravel crunched under footsteps. The sound came from the driveway, just on the other side of the fence. Mark's voice came from the side gate. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was worse than I thought." I turned. He was walking into the yard with a small bakery box in one hand, scanning the crowd until he found me. His expression was calm, but I could see the slight tension in his jaw. He'd heard something. Maybe not all of it, but enough. He looked at me first, just a quick check to see if I was okay, and then he looked at Dad. He crossed the yard in a few long strides. People moved out of his way without really meaning to. He stopped in front of my father and extended his hand. "I'm Mark, her fiancé." The silence was instant, complete. Dad's laugh cut off mid-breath. A few people turned to stare. Someone set down their drink with an audible clink. Mark kept his hand out, steady, waiting. Mom blinked twice, looked at me, looked at Mark, looked back at me. "Your fiancé?" "Yes," I said. Dad repeated Mark's name slowly, like he was testing it out, like he was trying to figure out if he'd heard it before. Then he reached out and shook Mark's hand, but his grip looked tighter than it needed to be. His whole posture had shifted. The easy confidence from 30 seconds ago was gone. The grin was gone. He looked like someone who just realized he'd miscalculated something important. Mark gave his full name, Mark Alvarez, and I watched my father's expression change again. Recognition. Not the kind where you remember meeting someone, the kind where you remember hearing about them. He recognized him, not personally. They'd never met. But Dad had been to a veterans fundraiser last year where Mark had been introduced as one of the coordinators. Mark worked in compliance and risk oversight for government contractors now, but he'd been an officer before that. Dad knew people who knew him, and in Dad's world, that mattered. Reputation mattered. Standing mattered. Who you knew and who knew you. Dad's voice dropped into a flatter register, the one he used when he was trying to regain control. Right, yeah, I think I've heard your name. He tried to recover with a forced chuckle. Something about small worlds. Something about how everyone's connected somehow. But the damage was done. The whole yard had just watched him mock the idea of someone wanting to marry me, and now that someone was standing right there in front of him, calm and steady and completely unbothered. Mom turned to me. Her voice was tight. Why didn't you tell us? You never asked. You could have mentioned it. You could have called. You could have brought him to meet us properly. I didn't think I needed to defend it, Mark said, and the word defend landed hard. Deliberate. Dad's jaw tightened. I saw his hand flex at his side. My cousin Jenna stepped in before anyone could say anything else. She came over to greet Mark, shook his hand, said something about how great it was to finally meet him. Mom's face flickered at the word finally, like she'd just realized that other people had known before she did. The rest of the afternoon had this weird, stretched quality. People came over to congratulate us, but their voices had that forced brightness people use when they're trying to smooth over something awkward. Dad stayed near the grill and talked louder than usual, telling stories to anyone who would listen. Mom kept glancing between me and him, like she was waiting for something to break. Mark stayed close to me, not hovering, just present. He didn't try to win anyone over. He didn't work the room. He didn't tell charming stories or make self-deprecating jokes to put people at ease. He just stood there, calm and solid, and every time someone made a passive comment, he either ignored it or redirected. When my aunt made a remark about how I'd always been independent, Mark said I still was. When my uncle joked about Mark having his hands full, Mark said he was lucky. He didn't argue. He didn't perform. He just didn't let anything stick. We left before dinner was served. I told Mom we had plans. She looked disappointed, but also relieved, like she was glad to have an excuse for us to go before Dad said something else that couldn't be taken back. Before the afternoon turned into something that required an actual confrontation instead of just passive discomfort. Dad was still at the grill when we said goodbye. He waved without looking directly at us. Made some comment about how we should come back soon. His voice was too loud, too forced, like he was performing normalcy for whoever was listening. On the drive home, Mark asked if I was okay. I said I was. He didn't push. He didn't ask me to process it or talk it through or explain what I was feeling. He just reached over and took my hand, and we drove the rest of the way in silence. The kind of comfortable silence where you don't need to fill the space with words. We stopped at a red light about halfway home. I looked out the window at nothing in particular. A gas station, a strip mall, cars passing in the opposite direction, and I realized my hands had stopped shaking, my chest had stopped feeling tight. I hadn't even noticed when it happened. I thought that was the end of it. A bad afternoon, an ugly moment. The kind of thing you file away and try not to think about. The kind of thing you learn to expect when you go home. You show up, you endure it, you leave, and then you recover for a few days before you have to do it again. I thought Dad would be embarrassed. I thought maybe he'd back off for a while, give me some space. Maybe even feel a little guilty about humiliating me in front of everyone. but my father wasn't done. A few days later, I got a call from the VA loan specialist I'd been working with. Her name was Carol. We'd been in contact for about 2 months. I'd applied for a home loan as part of the benefit tied to my service. The process had been moving smoothly. All the paperwork was in order. My credit was solid. My employment history checked out. My income was documented. We were just waiting on final underwriting approval. The finish line was in sight. Then it stopped. Carol's voice was polite but careful when she called. Professional. The kind of tone people use when they have to deliver news they know you won't like, but they're trying not to make it worse. Sarah, hi. I need to follow up on something that came up during the credit check. I was at home, sitting at my kitchen table. I'd just gotten back from a shift. I was tired. I was planning to eat something and then sleep for 10 hours. Instead, my stomach dropped. Okay, what's the issue? There's a retail credit account under your name. It's recent, about 6 weeks old. The balance is showing as delinquent. I told her I didn't have any retail credit accounts. I'd had the same credit card since college. I'd paid off a small personal loan 2 years ago. That was it. No store cards. No retail accounts. Nothing. She paused. I could hear her typing in the background, then she read me the details. A store card. One of those department store cards they push at the register when you're trying to check out. The kind where they offer you 20% off if you sign up right there. Opened in early May. My name, my social security number, my address listed as the billing address, an initial purchase of just over $800. No payments made. Already 30 days past due. I told her again that I'd never applied for it. I'd never even been to that store. I didn't shop there. I'd never walked through the door. She was quiet for a moment. I could hear her mouse clicking, more typing. Then she said she'd have to put the application on hold while I sorted it out. She was professional about it, but I could hear the shift in her tone. Suddenly, I wasn't a straightforward applicant anymore. I wasn't someone with clean credit and a stable job and a VA benefit that made me a safe bet. I was a risk. I was someone whose financial picture didn't match what they thought it was. Someone whose story didn't add up. She said to get back to her once I had documentation showing the account wasn't mine, a police report, a fraud affidavit, something official. Until then, the loan process was paused. I thanked her and got off the call. Then I sat there for a long time, just staring at my phone, just trying to process what I'd just heard, trying to figure out how this had happened. I pulled my credit report that night, all 3 bureaus. I paid for the full reports, not just the summaries. I went through every line, every account, every inquiry, every public record. Most of it I recognized. My car loan, which I'd had for 3 years and never missed a payment on. A credit card I'd had since college that I used for gas and groceries and paid off every month. A small personal loan I'd taken out a few years back to cover some medical expenses and already paid off. Everything was clean. Everything was in order. And then, right there in the middle of the Experian report, was the account Carol had mentioned, opened 6 weeks earlier. Retailer, a department store chain I'd never set foot in. Balance, $863.42. Status, 30 days delinquent. The billing address was listed as my parents' house. Their street, their city, their zip code. I stared at that line for a long time. Read it over and over. Click through to the details. The account had been opened on May 8th. The initial purchase had been made that same day. $863. No payments. The due date had been June 8th. It was now June 20th. 30 days past due and counting. Mark came into the room and saw my face. I didn't even hear him walk in. He was just suddenly there, standing next to the table, looking at me. What happened? I showed him the report, pointed to the line. He leaned over my shoulder and read it once, read it again. Then he pulled out the chair next to me and sat down. took the laptop and scrolled through the details himself. "Your dad has your social security number." I nodded. "He's had it since I was a kid. Tax stuff, old documents, insurance forms. When I was a dependent, I never thought about it. I never asked him to destroy anything or give it back. It never occurred to me." "And your address?" I didn't answer right away. I just sat there, feeling the weight of it settling in. Then I said he asked for it a couple months ago, said he needed to update some records. Something about making sure his paperwork was current in case anything happened to him. Medical power of attorney or something. I didn't question it. I just texted him my address. Mark's expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten. He set the paper down carefully. "This isn't just sloppy. This is deliberate." I wanted to argue. I wanted to come up with some other explanation. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone stole his information too. Maybe the credit bureau mixed something up. But I couldn't make myself believe any of that. The timeline was too clean. Dad had asked for my address in late March. The account was opened in early May, right after I'd confirmed I was coming to the cookout, right after I'd mentioned, casually in a text to my mom, that Mark and I were looking at houses. The address was too specific, and the timing, right after the cookout, right after Mark showed up and made Dad look small in front of everyone, felt like punctuation. I filed a fraud dispute with the credit bureau that night. I submitted an identity theft report. I filed a police report, even though the officer who took it made it pretty clear that they probably weren't going to do much with it. Financial fraud between family members was messy, hard to prosecute, hard to prove intent, but I filed it anyway because I needed the paper trail. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus. Then I called the retailer directly and explained that the account had been opened without my authorization. They said they'd investigate. They said it would take time, maybe 30 days, maybe longer. Mark was already thinking ahead. He's not going to stop with the credit card. I asked what he meant. He went after your loan. That's a big move. That's not just embarrassing you in front of the family. That's going after something that matters, something you've been working toward. It's not just about control anymore. He's escalating. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. I wanted to believe that Dad would realize he'd gone too far and back off. But 2 days later, Mark's HR department forwarded him an email. It had been sent to their general inquiry address, the kind of email address that's public, listed on the company website for questions and concerns. The sender had used a generic email account, no name attached, just a string of random letters and numbers. But the content was specific. It claimed that Mark had a conflict of interest in his current role because of a personal relationship with someone who worked in a related field. It hinted at misconduct. It suggested that Mark might be compromising his professional judgment. It didn't name me directly, but it was clearly about me. It mentioned that this person had connections to military contracting. It mentioned that Mark had recently gotten engaged. It mentioned that the relationship might create problems for his employer if it wasn't disclosed properly. Mark forwarded it to his supervisor immediately. He called me right after. His voice was calm, but I could hear the edge underneath. He explained what had happened and said his supervisor told him to document everything. They'd handle it internally. They'd investigate. They'd make sure it didn't create any problems. But the fact that someone had tried to create a professional problem for him, using vague accusations that required formal review, that was a message. That was deliberate. That wasn't just lashing out. That was targeting. Mark looked at me after he got off the call with his supervisor. We were sitting in his living room. It was late afternoon. The light coming through the blinds made everything look washed out. Your dad's trying to make this hurt. I didn't argue this time. I wanted to respond. I wanted to call him and ask him what he thought he was doing. I wanted to text my mom and ask if she knew what Dad was up to. I wanted to confront it head on. But Mark stopped me. "Don't give him the reaction," he said. "That's what he wants. He wants you scrambling. He wants you emotional. He wants you calling and texting and trying to explain yourself. He wants you to feel like you have to defend your life to him. Don't hand him that. So I didn't call. I didn't text. I kept working the process. I followed up with the credit bureau every few days. I documented every step. I kept copies of everything. I stayed operational. It felt like triage. You focus on what you can stabilize. You focus on the things you can control. You don't waste time on what you can't fix, and you don't let anger make your decisions. Romans 12:18 kept coming back to me. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. I wasn't sure peace was possible anymore. But I could control my part. I could stay clear. I could refuse to give him what he was looking for. My mom started texting a few days after the cookout. At first, it was vague, just checking in, asking how I was, saying she hoped I was doing okay. But then the questions got sharper. She wanted to know why I hadn't called, why I was avoiding them, why I wasn't responding to Dad's messages. She said Dad was hurt. She said he didn't understand why I was acting this way. She said he'd just been joking at the cookout. She said I was being too sensitive. I didn't answer right away. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what I was actually dealing with, because it felt like the ground kept shifting. Every time I thought I knew what was happening, something else came up. Then my friend Erin sent me a message. Erin worked in HR at a federal agency. We'd known each other since training. She'd been at my promotion ceremony a couple years back. We didn't talk every day, but we kept in touch. She texted me on a Wednesday afternoon and said she needed to tell me something. She'd heard through a mutual contact that someone had been asking questions about me. Not directly, not formally, just feeling around, trying to find out where I worked, what my role was, whether I'd had any issues, whether there'd been any complaints or write-ups or disciplinary actions. The person asking had mentioned they were family. They'd said they were concerned. They'd used my father's name. Erin told me she'd shut it down immediately. She told the contact that if someone had a legitimate concern about an employee, they needed to go through proper channels. But she wanted me to know it had happened. She wanted me to be aware that someone was trying to dig into my work life. That's when I knew it wasn't going to stop on its own. I called Erin back immediately, asked her to walk me through exactly what she'd been told, what had been said, what questions had been asked. I needed to know the scope. She said the person, whoever they were, had contacted someone in her office who knew me casually. A guy named Trevor I'd worked with on a joint training exercise a couple years back. Not someone I was close with, but someone who knew my name and knew where I worked and might have been willing to help out what seemed like a concerned family member. They'd framed it as worry. They'd said they were concerned about me, that I'd been under a lot of stress lately, that they wanted to make sure I was doing okay at work, that they were trying to figure out if there was anything they should be worried about. But the questions they were asking weren't about my well-being. They weren't asking if I seemed depressed or if I needed support. They were asking about my record, my reputation, my performance, whether I'd been written up, whether there'd been complaints, whether anyone had concerns about my judgment or my ability to do my job, whether I'd been having problems with authority, whether I'd been showing up late, whether my work had been slipping. Erin had flagged it immediately. She'd told Trevor that if someone had a legitimate concern about an employee's welfare, they needed to go through proper channels, that making informal inquiries like that wasn't appropriate and could actually put people in a difficult position, that it could create liability issues. She'd shut it down hard, but she wanted me to know it had happened. She wanted me to be prepared in case someone tried it again. She wanted me to document it. I thanked her. Told her I appreciated her looking out for me, told her I'd handle it. And then I got off the call and sat down with Mark and told him everything. He didn't look surprised. He just nodded slowly, his jaw tight, and said, "We need to document this, all of it, every single thing." So that's what we did. I pulled out my phone and started screenshotting texts. Every message my mom had sent since the cookout. Every casual check-in that had turned into a guilt trip. Every, "Are you okay?" That was really, "Why are you making this difficult?" Every dad's hurt that was really, you need to apologize for embarrassing him. I saved them all, downloaded them, backed them up. I printed out the credit dispute paperwork, the fraud report I'd filed with the retailer, the police report, the responses from the credit bureaus acknowledging my dispute. I organized everything by date, put it in a folder, added labels. I pulled up the timeline in my Notes app and added everything I could remember with as much specificity as possible. When the card was opened, May 8th, when Dad had asked for my address, late March, when I'd mentioned the house hut to my mom, mid-April, when the loan was flagged 3 days after the cookout, when the email went to Mark's HR 5 days after the cookout, when my dad started asking around about my job sometime in the week following the cookout, when my mom started texting the day after the cookout. I wrote it all down, created a document, added dates and times and names where I had them, left blanks where I didn't, made notes about what was confirmed and what was secondhand, built a case without even meaning to. We were just trying to protect ourselves, but the pattern was right there, clear. Mark looked at the stack of papers on the table. He picked up one of the printouts, scanned it, set it back down carefully. You need to call them, but not to argue, not to explain, to state boundaries, facts and consequences. That's it. I asked if I should record it. He pulled out his phone and looked it up right there at the table. Searched for recording consent laws. Read through a few sources. One-party consent. As long as one person on the call knows it's being recorded, it's legal. Since you'd be on the call, you can record it. I asked if that felt manipulative, if I was becoming what they always said I was. He looked at me for a long moment. You're documenting abuse. That's not manipulation, that's protection. My dad texted that night. The first time he'd reached out directly since the cookout. The message was short. He said he was just trying to protect me, that I was turning it into something bigger than it needed to be. I read the text 3 times. Then I put my phone down without replying. Instead, I opened a new note and drafted a list. Clear boundaries. No access to my mail. No use of my personal information for any reason. No contact with my workplace. No contact with Mark's workplace. No making inquiries about me. If any of it happened again, I'd report it officially. I'd file charges if I had to. My mom texted the next morning and said we needed to talk. She said we couldn't just let this sit. She said family doesn't just stop talking to family. She said I was being unreasonable. I texted back that I'd call the next day. I said Mark would be on the call too. She objected immediately. She said this was family business. She said it wasn't appropriate to involve someone from outside the family. She said it felt like I was treating them like criminals. I texted back. The truth holds better with witnesses. She didn't reply after that. The call was scheduled for 3 in the afternoon. Friday, I had the day off. Mark took the afternoon off. We set up at my kitchen table. I placed my phone on a small tripod, started the recording app before I even dialed. Had the folder of documents next to me. The timeline pulled up on my laptop. The boundary list printed out. Mark sat across from me where he could see the screen but wouldn't be directly in the frame unless he leaned forward. Mom answered. She was sitting in their living room, the same couch I'd grown up with, the same wall behind her with the family photos in mismatched frames. She was sitting stiff, her hands folded in her lap. I could see Dad behind her, arms crossed, standing near the doorway like he was ready to walk out at any moment. She looked at the screen, looked at me. Then she saw Mark and her whole expression tightened. Why is he there? Mark leaned forward just enough to be visible, because this crossed into professional and legal territory. She started to argue. Her voice went up. This is between family. We don't need. I cut her off. I'm going to make this simple. Someone opened a credit account in my name without my permission. The billing address is your house. The application lists Dad's phone number as the authorized contact. That's fraud. Dad looked away for a second, just a quick glance to the side. Then he looked back at the camera. Mom's face shifted. The tight concern smoothed into something defensive. Your father was trying to help. You've always been bad with paperwork. You lose track of things. He was just trying to make sure you had credit established in case you needed it. I didn't apply for that card, I said. My voice was level. Calm. I didn't authorize anyone to apply for it. I didn't give permission for anyone to use my information. Mark leaned forward. And my HR department received multiple communications trying to create a workplace conflict for me. That's not help. That's escalation. Dad spoke for the first time. His voice was flat. I didn't contact your job. The messages came from an email address tied to this household, Mark said, and they included personal details that only someone close to Sarah would know. Details about our relationship. Details about my work. Details that weren't public. Mom's hands tightened in her lap. You can't just accuse people without proof. I have proof, Mark said. I forwarded everything to my supervisor. It's documented, it's being investigated, and if it continues, it becomes a legal matter. The silence stretched out. Dad shifted his weight, uncrossed his arms, crossed them again. I kept my voice steady. I wasn't trying to trade insults. I wasn't trying to make them feel bad. I was trying to state what was true and hold the line without surrendering the boundary. If it was possible, if there was any way forward that didn't involve lawyers and formal complaints, I wanted that. But peace didn't mean pretending this hadn't happened. I picked up the list I'd written. Here's what needs to happen. No access to my information. No use of my social security number. No use of my address. No contact with my workplace. No contact with Mark's workplace. No making inquiries about me to anyone I work with. If any of this happens again, I'm reporting it officially to the police, to the credit bureaus, to whoever needs to know. This stops now. Mom stared at me. Her voice went quiet, almost a whisper. You're threatening us. No, I said. I'm telling you the consequences. She shook her head slowly, her mouth pressed into a thin line. You've changed. You used to understand family. You used to know that family sticks together even when things are hard. Now you're treating us like we're strangers. You committed fraud, Mark said. His voice was calm, factual. You used her information without permission. You tried to damage her credit. You tried to interfere with her loan. You tried to create problems at my job. Those aren't mistakes. Those are choices. Dad took a step forward. His face was red. You don't get to come into our family and tell us how to handle our daughter. I'm not in your family, Mark said. I'm in hers. And if you keep trying to interfere with her life, you're going to deal with me. Mom's eyes went wide. Is this what you want? You want to side with him against your own parents? I'm not siding against you, I said. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. She stared at me for a long moment. Then her face went cold. Fine. Do what you want, but don't come to us when you need help. Don't call us when things fall apart. I looked at her through the screen. I don't. The silence was absolute. I could see the exact moment she realized I meant it. Dad reached forward and ended the call. The screen went dark. I saved the recording immediately, backed it up. Then I sat back and let out a long breath. Mark reached over and squeezed my hand. You did good. I wasn't sure if I'd done good. I wasn't sure if I'd done the right thing. But I'd done the only thing I could do. Within an hour, the text started. My mom said I'd crossed a line, that I was being unreasonable, that I was making this harder than it needed to be. My dad sent a message saying they just wanted peace, that they didn't understand why I was being so hostile. Neither of them acknowledged what they'd done. Neither of them apologized. They just wanted me to drop it. They wanted things to go back to normal. But normal had never been safe for me. Normal had always meant shrinking myself to make them comfortable. Normal had meant accepting that I was the problem. I saved every message to the folder. Screenshot. Save. Document. Mark and I had developed a rhythm by then. Every time something came in, we logged it. We didn't respond. We just collected evidence, built the file, kept the record clean. The credit bureaus confirmed they'd received my dispute documentation, an automated email with the case number and the timeline. The retailer sent a follow-up email a few days later saying they were reviewing the case and would be in contact within 2 weeks. Mark forwarded the newest anonymous email that had come into his HR to his supervisor as an additional communication attempt. He wrote a brief note explaining the pattern. Everything went into the file. Everything got documented. We were building a case without even meaning to. We were just protecting ourselves. I kept my focus narrow. Stop the interference. Clear the credit. Hold distance. Don't engage with the bait. Don't give them ammunition. Don't let anger make the decisions. It was like running triage in my head. Prioritize what mattered. Let the rest go. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, about 3 weeks after the call, the notification came through. I was at work, in the middle of a shift. My phone buzzed in my locker during a break, and I didn't check it until an hour later. When I finally looked, there was an email from the credit bureau. Subject line, dispute resolved. I opened it standing in the hallway outside the break room. My heart was pounding. I realized I'd been holding my breath. The account had been removed. The email said the investigation had determined that the account had been opened without my authorization, that the application contained information I had not provided, that the entire history had been wiped from my credit report, my score had been recalculated, the fraudulent account no longer existed as far as the credit system was concerned. I read the email twice. Then I just stood there for a minute, holding my phone, trying to process what I was feeling. It wasn't relief exactly. It was more like the moment when you've been holding your breath underwater and you finally surface. You're not happy. You're not celebrating. You're just breathing again. You're just functional again. I forwarded the documentation to Carol, the VA lender, right there in the hallway. She replied within 2 hours. They'd resumed processing the loan. She apologized for the delay. She says she understood these situations were complicated. She says she'd be in touch with next steps by the end of the week. I texted Mark. Just 2 words. It's done. He called me 20 minutes later during his own break. Asked if I was okay. Asked how I was feeling. I said I was fine. I said I was good. He said he'd pick up dinner on his way over. Something to celebrate. I told him we didn't need to make it a big thing. He said we didn't have to, but we could at least eat something that wasn't reheated leftovers from 3 days ago. He brought home Thai food that night. Pad Thai, spring rolls, some kind of curry I couldn't remember the name of. We sat at my kitchen table and ate straight from the containers like it was any other Tuesday. Like we hadn't just closed a chapter that had been consuming us for weeks. It felt good. Normal felt like a victory. Normal felt like something I'd earned instead of something I had to perform. My mom texted a few days after that. The message was vague, carefully worded. She said she hadn't realized how serious it was. She said she didn't want things to stay like this. She said, family shouldn't let things fester. She said she hoped we could move past it. I read it 3 times. I looked for an apology. I looked for acknowledgement. I looked for some sign that she understood what had actually happened, that they had committed fraud, that they had tried to sabotage my future. I didn't find any of that, just vague regret that things were uncomfortable, just a wish that I would let it go and make things easier for everyone, just the hope that I would go back to being the person who absorbed everything and never pushed back. I texted back that I needed space and that I'd reach out when I was ready. She didn't respond to that. The silence was louder than anything she could have said. The calls slowed over the next few weeks. The group texts stopped. The family group chat that used to ping constantly with updates and photos and random questions went quiet. My name stopped appearing in it. I wasn't sure if they'd removed me or if they were just avoiding me. Either way, the effect was the same. My dad didn't contact me directly, not once. I heard through my mom, in one of her vague follow-up texts a week later that he was hurt and confused, that he didn't understand why I was being this way, that he felt like I'd turned my back on the family, that he was telling relatives I'd changed, that I wasn't the same person anymore. I didn't respond to that either, because he was right. I wasn't the same person. I'd stopped being the person who made myself smaller so he could feel bigger. I'd stopped being the person who absorbed insults and called it love. I'd stopped being the person who believed that family meant accepting harm. The lender called about a week after the credit bureau decision to confirm the final approval steps. She walked me through the timeline in detail. My credit was clear. My employment was verified. My income was documented. My loan was moving forward. Closing would be in about 6 weeks, assuming everything stayed on track. She asked if I had a real estate agent, if I'd started looking at properties, if I had questions about the process. I told her I was working with an agent, that we'd been looking for a couple weeks, that I was hoping to find something small, something manageable, something that was mine. I looked around my apartment after I got off the call. It was small, temporary. 1 bedroom, a galley kitchen, a living room barely big enough for a couch, and a TV stand. I'd moved in 2 years earlier, telling myself it was just until I figured out my next step, just until I saved enough, just until I had a plan. And now I actually had a next step. I was actually going to buy a house. I was going to have something that was mine, something nobody could take away, something I'd earned through my own work, something that represented a life I'd built instead of a life I'd been assigned. That night, after Mark had gone home and I was sitting on my couch in the quiet, I thanked God. Not out loud, just silently, in my head, the way I used to pray when I was a kid and didn't want anyone to hear. I thanked Him for steadiness, for helping me hold the boundary without collapsing into bitterness, for giving me the strength to stop shrinking, for reminding me that peace doesn't always mean reconciliation, that sometimes peace means protecting yourself, that sometimes it means saying no, that sometimes it means walking away from people who refuse to see you as anything other than a problem to be managed. Because the answer to my dad's question that day in the backyard wasn't just that a fiancé showed up. It wasn't just that Mark walked through the gate at the exact right moment and made my father look foolish in front of everyone. The answer was that I'd finally stopped believing that I needed to make myself smaller to keep the peace. I stopped letting their version of me be the one that mattered. I stopped accepting that love meant tolerating harm. I stopped waiting for them to see me as someone worth respecting. And when someone tries to weaponize your life against you, when they try to use your own information to sabotage your future, when they try to destroy your opportunities because they can't stand the idea of you succeeding without them, the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to give them the reaction they're aiming for. You stay steady. You document everything. You set the boundary and you hold it. Not because it's easy, not because it feels good, not because you're trying to punish them, but because you're worth protecting, because your life is yours, because you don't owe anyone access to your peace, and because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply refuse to shrink.